The story begins with a group of explorers who are in the middle of the South Atlantic Oceania. On that ship, there was a weather officer named David who reports the weather conditions. They were heading to an island located in the middle of the ocean. The government had sent David there to observe the island's changing weather. David was to stay there for approximately 1 year. He had to collect weather data for an entire year and then return back. David was provided with food and all the necessary supplies for the entire year. After several days of travel, they finally reached the island. They landed on the island by boat. The island was completely deserted. Not even a bird was visible. There was a lighthouse and a small house on the island where David was to live. Before this, a weather officer named Robert had lived here. But now his duty time had ended. He had spent a year alone on the island collecting weather data. Now, David would stay there in his place to collect weather data, and he would return with the old officer Robert to the ship. Go away. But when the entire team visited the house, they were astonished to find no trace of any human being. Inside the room, all the old officer's belongings were scattered here and there. Captain and David thought that perhaps someone might be inside the lighthouse. Captain and David, without wasting any time, headed towards the lighthouse, and they witnessed a strange sight. They saw that the entire lighthouse was surrounded by sharp and pointed wooden poles, as if someone had deliberately locked it so that no one could enter. Captain and David knocked on the lighthouse gate several times, but received no response from inside. Finally, they pushed the gate open with force and entered. Inside the lighthouse, they found a man named Gruner. When they asked Gruner about the old weather officer, Robert, he replied that he was dead. He went out to sea and never returned towards the sea. David and the captain were both shocked. After hearing all this, the captain told David, "If you still want to, you can come back with us today." But David refused to go back. David thought that if he could provide the government with accurate weather reports of the island, he could earn a substantial sum of money. After which, the captain gave him a gun for his own protection. The captain told David that this place didn't seem safe to him. "Take care of yourself." They left him there and went back. And now they will be back again in a year. After the captain left, David settled the house a bit and made it habitable. After nightfall, he found a diary in the drawer that belonged to the old weather officer Robert. A lot was written about the island in that diary. Some things were written about a mysterious creature in the diary, but everything was not clear. Some things were incomplete. David read every line carefully. There were also sketches of some strange animals in the diary. David couldn't understand why he had drawn such pictures. Perhaps he was lonely and did it to pass the time. There was also a photo of the old officer's wife on one page of the diary. David grew tired of reading the diary, and gradually his eyes began to fall. The next morning, David began collecting weather data, but as he approached the sea, he stopped. He noticed that some stones among the rocks were arranged in a strange way, and shells were placed among them. Seeing a strange pattern, David thought maybe Gruner had done all this. He thought this and got back to his work. While working, when he looked through his binoculars at the lighthouse, he saw another person with Gruner, but in the blink of an eye, he disappeared. David tried to look for him again, but then he thought it was his imagining. That night, David was busy with his work when there was a knock on the door. He thought maybe it was Gruner. David called his name but got no answer. As David approached the door with a lamp in his hand, he heard strange noises echoing in his ears that were not at all human. He then saw a strange creature's hand trying to get in from under the gate. It was not a human hand at all. The sight of this made David's feet tremble. He immediately ran to the basement and hid there. Within a short while, the mysterious creature had already entered the house. It was secretly looking for David, and David watched it from a small crack in the basement. David's movement made the creature see David. The creature spotted him, after which the creature rushed towards David, trying to kill him. Tried to grab him through the crack, so David quickly took the knife and stabbed him in the eye to protect himself. Immediately, he took the knife and thrust it into her eye, stabbed her. Crutcher screamed and ran away. But she could come back at any time, and David's mind confirmed that what he had written in the diary about Crutcher was true. He couldn't sleep the whole night out of fear. The next morning, when David went out, he saw some footprints on the sand that didn't look like human footprints at all. The footprints led straight to the sea. Now David understood why Gruner had placed sharp sticks around the lighthouse. Now David knows that if he stays in this house, those Crutchers can kill him anytime. Terrified, David runs toward the lighthouse and shouts to Gruner, "Open the gate. I want in." but Gruner refuses to let him in, saying, "You should have returned with the ship." David returns disappointed, because Gruner didn't want him even near the lighthouse. He pours water on him and tells him to go away. Now he has to do something himself. He blocks every window in the house with wooden planks. He builds a fence around the house with sharp sticks and places old papers and books outside the gate. Then they douse them with oil so that if Crutcher returned, he could be scared away with fire. But there was something David didn't know yet, and he was going to find out tonight. Luckily, he found an old box inside the house. Inside the box was a gun and a lot of bullets. Seeing this gave him a little hope of staying alive. As Stevenson began to set, David's fear began to grow, and soon the darkness of night fell all around. David sat quietly in a corner of the house with his gun in his hand. His heart was pounding. Just then, a strange sound was heard, and when David hid from the window and looked out at the ocean, it was as if the ground beneath his feet had slipped away. He saw not just one, but many of the same strange creatures coming out of the water and heading towards him. Soon, they all gathered together and tried to break down the door of the room. David immediately started firing. Some of the creatures fell and died. David thought that after hearing the gunshots, they would run away in fear. But seeing his comrades dying, he became even more angrier. David then executes the plan and sets fire to the papers and old books lying outside the gate. Seeing the fire, the creatures flee in fear and return to the sea, but now the fire has reached David's house. The door of the house caught fire and slowly began to spread because the entire house was made of wood. David quickly wrapped himself in a sheet, saving his life, and hid behind a large rock near the lighthouse while shooting the creatures. David also sustained a serious injury to his hand. Then suddenly, a heavy rain began to fall. The fire slowly began to die down, but even after a night of rain, David couldn't save his house by morning. The entire house had burned to ashes. Now, if David wanted to survive, he had to take shelter in the lighthouse. He picked up his rifle and hid among the rocks near the lighthouse, waiting for Gruner to come to fetch water. When Gruner left the lighthouse to fetch water, David followed him. But suddenly, a strange creature that was near Gruner appeared. It attacked David, but somehow David managed to subdue it. That creature was Gruner's protector. As he was about to shoot him, Gruner immediately stopped David and said, "Stop, it's mine. It's a pet." David didn't shoot and seized the opportunity and made a bet with Gruner. "If you want to keep this creature alive, let me stay in the lighthouse or else I'll kill it." Gruner agreed, because David had plenty of food and gunpowder. Before evening, they returned to the lighthouse with the remaining food, and both of them fell asleep peacefully. The next morning, the creature was quietly licking David's hand. When David woke up, he saw that his hand had completely healed due to the creature's licking. David was astonished by all this. David now wanted to learn more from Kroner about this creature and reveal it to the world because it was nothing short of magic. David thought that if he revealed the secret of this creature to the world, both David and Kroner would earn a lot of money and fame. But Kroner didn't want any of this. He didn't want to leave this island anywhere. Kroner had no one left in this world. This island was perfect for him, where he considered himself a king and master of his own will. That's why he had written in many parts of the island, "Kroner is the king here." But David couldn't understand how this strange creature became Kroner's darling, so Kroner explained that he once saved her life. She accidentally got caught in his fishing net. This creature was small then, and from that day on, she stayed with Kroner everyone. She started obeying his every command, but Kroner was a strict man. He treated this creature very badly. Kroner had physical relationship with this creature every day. Kroner told him that once this creature had even attacked him, and in return, Kroner punished it so that after that punishment, the creature began to consider itself Kroner's slave. And you all too must understand why those creatures come out of the sea every night. They all come to rescue their mate from Kroner and take him back. But Kroner doesn't allow that. Those creatures can't attack in daylight because the sun burns their skin. David didn't want to stay here anymore. He wanted to escape from the island somehow and escape. Well, evening began to fall, and Kroner told him to get ready with his gun because the creatures could attack at any moment. He prepared to turn on the lighthouse light, and within moments, a large number of creatures emerged from the sea. They continued moving toward the lighthouse. Kroner continued to fire at them, but David was completely terrified. He started moving toward the lighthouse. Despite Kroner's repeated requests to stop, he simply sat quietly in a corner, and soon David fell unconscious. Kroner fought these creatures alone all night. The next morning, Kroner, enraged, poured water in David's face, woke him up and said, "If you want to stay alive, you must kill them." Otherwise, you will be expelled from the lighthouse and you will have to obey my every command. Bring water every day. Do all the small and big things around the lighthouse and also serve as guard duty with me at night." Now, David had no other option. That's why it became his compulsion to do all this. David now began to obey Kroner's every command. But there was one thing he didn't like at all, that every day he had to physically torture that female creature in different ways. Night falls and they both go on guard duty again. They get ready for the battle. They get ready, and once again the Crutcher emerges from the sea. But today David wasn't afraid. He started firing at the Crutcher, but today, Kroner wasn't doing anything. He leaves David outside, closes the lighthouse gate, and sits quietly inside so David can learn how to fight these creatures. Goes on. The night passes, and morning comes. Kroner sees David sitting outside the lighthouse gate covered in blood. Now he'd learned how to fight these creatures. How to fight. Time passed like this. Nights fighting these creatures and all. Day managing Kroner's lighthouse. The island had become like a closed house for him. He always wondered when he would leave this place and breathe a sigh of freedom. Over time, David had developed a strange friendship with the female creature. David began to feel bad for her. Now he understood how difficult it was to leave one's people and be alone. Perhaps the creature felt the same way. David even gave the creature a name, Anarius. In this way, days passed, and then one day, they noticed that the attacks from these creatures were gradually decreasing. David wondered, maybe they would go somewhere else in the winter, or maybe they had realized that there's nothing to be gained by fighting these two. But Kroner told him that that wasn't the case at all. They'll attack again. Now they're increasing their numbers. A few more days passed like this. One night after dinner, Kroner and David started playing chess to pass the time. But that's where Kroner made a big mistake. They got so engrossed in the game that they forgot to turn on the lighthouse lights. Taking advantage of the darkness, the creatures attacked them. David saw that the number of creatures was so great that even two people together couldn't fight for long, and this time they had no plan. The guns had almost run out of bullets. Somehow they managed to escape and reached the top of the lighthouse. But in the meantime, Kroner suffered a serious leg injury. The creatures had overpowered them today. Both thought their death was certain. But fortunately, morning came. As the sun slowly rose, the creatures left the lighthouse and went back to the sea. After the scorching sun rises, Anarius tries to heal Kroner's wounds, but by now, David has realized that he can't win this battle with these creatures. He's almost out of bullets. He's running out of food. He doesn't have enough food to last much longer. Luckily, the next day, while David was wandering around outside the lighthouse, he spotted a ship at sea. He quickly retrieved a flare gun from inside and went to signal the ship. But Kroner stopped him because he didn't want David to leave. At that very moment, Anarius attacked Kroner. She wanted to save David from Kroner. Kroner didn't want anyone to leave this island. This island was his own world where he lived like a king. He didn't want to let David go either. After being alone for so long, he now had someone he could talk to, and if David went back to that ship, he would go there and tell everyone about Anarius and them. So now David couldn't leave. Slowly, the ship disappeared into the sea before David's eyes. Now he had nothing to do. A few more days passed like this. Kroner was still treating both David and Anarius badly. But he especially beat Anarius, which David didn't like at all. One day, David gifted Anarius a small toy boat which he had made from a fishbone. But when Anarius saw the boat, he took David to a corner of the island where a real boat was actually kept. When David asked Kroner about the boat, he said yes. He already knew that there was a boat on this part of the island. Kroner says that some people came to this island by boat to save their lives. But before morning, none of them survived by being killed by these creatures. They were all carrying ammunition in a ship. But due to a storm at sea, their ship sank near this island. Upon hearing all this, an idea came to David's mind. He had something like a diving suit with him. David said that if one of them puts on that suit and goes to the part of the ocean where the ship sank, maybe they might find some bullets or dynamite which would make it easier to fight these creatures. But Kroner refused to believe this. But David was willing to risk his life to do something else. Days passed like this. A deep connection developed between David and Anarius. David began to like him. Kroner secretly observed them romancing all this. Kroner felt that Anarius would snatch her away so that David would have to be removed from the way. The next day, Kroner himself agrees to David's offer. He tells David, "Okay, you'll put on a suit and go down into the water and collect a lot of RDX there. Then I'll pull you up to the boat." But Kroner's real intention was something else. He wanted David to help him bring the boxes of dynamite stored under the sea back to the surface and then leave him alone in the ocean so that the creatures can kill him. This way the dynamite will also come to him, and Anarius will become his slave again. They both of them boarded a boat and reached the spot where the ship had sunk. David put on a diving suit and dove into the sea. Upon reaching the bottom, David saw that the ship was completely destroyed. But luckily he found some boxes of dynamite, but suddenly some creatures appeared before him. Seeing the creatures, David panicked and fell down. The driving suit was so heavy that he couldn't even move, and David couldn't even send a signal to Kroner. Kroner thought that perhaps the creatures had killed David. But they were actually just two little kids. David somehow left his diving suit there and managed to get himself to the surface. There he found some old boxes containing dynamite. Then the two got to work. They laid dynamite in 2 layers around the lighthouse so that when the next attack came, they could destroy the monsters in one go. A few months passed and the snowy season arrived. But then the creatures disappeared again. Suddenly the attacks had stopped. It was as if the creatures had gotten wind of the trap being laid for them. That's why they weren't attacking anymore. They were. Kroner thought perhaps Anarius had alerted the creatures to this. Because of this, he began torturing Anarius, but David stopped him. Finally, they both devised a new plan: to leave the main gate of the lighthouse open so that as soon as the creatures approached, they could blow them all up with dynamite. David cleverly took advantage of this plan and told Anarius to scream from the top of the lighthouse. Hearing Anarius's voice, all the creatures erupted in anger. When the creatures saw that the lighthouse's main gate was open, they thought it was a good opportunity to free Anarius, but it was actually a trick. Shortly, the creatures began emerging from the sea. They headed straight for the main gate and attacked David as soon as they entered. David also shows courage and escapes from the creature. As soon as they all reach the creatures near the lighthouse, Kroner presses the dynamite lever, but there's no explosion. In fact, David had disconnected it, and Kroner forgot to reconnect it. David immediately runs upstairs and begins connecting the dynamite wire. By then, the creatures are trying to climb the lighthouse. Only Kroner alone can stop them. As soon as the connection is complete, David blows up the first layer, killing many of the creatures in the blast. But enough monsters are still ready to attack the lighthouse. This causes Kroner to detonate the second layer as well. Both are knocked unconscious by the powerful explosion. When they regain consciousness the next morning, they discover that Anarius is gone. They find that Anarius is gone. Dead creatures were lying all around from the blast. Kroner was killing all those who survived the wounded. Then David noticed Anaclus hanging from the neck of one of them. Seeing the creature writhing in pain, David felt pity for it and realized his mistake. The creatures he had considered dangerous until now were just like humans. They just couldn't speak. But for Kroner, all this was meaningless talk. After that day, the creatures were never able to attack again. But every day there were cries from the seashore. Sounds of crying came from the shore. David still had no idea how much damage they had caused, how many families were torn apart, how many children had lost their loved ones, all because of a misunderstanding. The next day, David saw some of the little children of those creatures in the sea, all those who had lost their families. David made a circle of stones and placed the little toy boat in the middle of it so that Enris would see it and return. David waited for several hours, but Enris never returned. After waking up in the morning, David saw Kroner sleeping. Kroner had some old things. Among them was an old photograph, and as soon as David saw the photograph, he was astonished. The girl whose photo he had seen the day before, in the diary of the old officer Robert, was none other than Kroner's wife, and Kroner was standing with her in the photo. Actually, Weather Officer Robert, who had arrived a year earlier, was not dead but had changed his identity. That means Kroner is Weather Officer Robert. He had simply changed his name because we never wanted to leave this island was. Seeing all this, David also gave up hope that he would ever be able to leave this island. The next evening, when David went to the beach, he noticed that the small boat in the circle was no longer there. But in the same spot, he saw a small baby creature holding the boat. David threw the burning stick in his hand into the middle of the circle to show that he did not intend to fight and that no one should feel threatened. He wanted to be friends with them. Shortly after, Anarius emerged from the waves of the sea, followed by the entire group of creatures from the sea. But this time, no one attacks David because they too now want peace. They only wanted a safe place for their children. But then Kroner arrives with a gun in his hand. Just then, Kroner arrives with a gun in his hand. Kroner wonders how he will feel. Superior if peace is established. David tries to convince him that these creatures don't want to fight, they want peace. But Kroner doesn't listen to anyone. He shouts to Anarius, "Go inside!" But this was the first time that Anarius didn't listen to him because now she wasn't his maid. Seeing this, Kroner feels that he no longer has any power over the island. Kroner begins to feel weak inside because no one was obeying him. In a rage, he headed for the lighthouse. David thought perhaps Kroner had now understood that every animal wants freedom. No one wants to live as a slave to anyone. But the ghost of kingship wasn't going to get off Kroner's head. As soon as he reached the lighthouse, he fired a flare from his signal gun, which struck a baby crutcher and killed it instantly. All the crutchers fled in fear, and Enrius also lost all trust in David. Furious with rage, David immediately rushed to the lighthouse to teach Kroner a lesson. David starts fighting him. Why did you do this all? These people just wanted peace, but Kroner had become so violent that he decided to kill David with an iron rod in his hand. Just as he was about to strike David, David called him by his real name and said, "Stop, Robert, you are not a murderer." Hearing this, Kroner stopped immediately. In reality, Robert was never such a person. No. His mental health had deteriorated due to being alone after coming to this island. Loneliness, the death of his wife, and deep depression had all made him like this. He wasn't actually a killer. He was a good human being. Kroner realized that these creatures never wanted to fight. They just wanted peace. Kroner killed them just to show himself powerful, and now Kroner realized his mistake was. So he surrendered himself to the creatures, and within moments, they killed him. David locks himself inside the lighthouse. Time continues to pass like this, and a year later, a government official arrives on the island. There is also a new weather officer. Now, a new government officer was assigned to the island as weather monitor. When the captain asks David about the previous officer, David says the same thing. He went towards the water but never returned, and the weather officer also thinks Davidus Groner. David didn't correct their misunderstanding. He quietly went to the balcony and stood there without saying anything because he also didn't want to leave the island anymore, just like Kroner. Meanwhile, Anris was also happy with her family. Now she wasn't afraid of a man like Kroner. Now they could live freely both on the island and in the sea. With this, the story ends.